Good evening, my friends. Are you here for another spooky story? Then come on in. Settle in now, for tonight I have quite the tale to tell. Are you ready? Good. Then let us begin. Before we begin, once more, I apologize for the audio quality. My headset no longer works, so I have resorted to recording with my phone until my new microphone gets here next week. Please bear with me in the meantime. Tonight, I would like to do a bit more of a candid sort of broadcast and just talk about an interesting tale I heard from a friend of mine back in middle school. I would say take this with a grain of salt, because I only heard the story from him the one time, but it did leave a bit of an impression when I heard it. Now please, gather round and listen to Halos and Shadow Folk. For the sake of anonymity, yeah, I said that right, we will call this young man Ben. I met Ben way back in middle school, 6th grade to be exact. He was a mostly quiet kid, although he wasn't naturally standoffish. In fact, he was fairly outgoing once you got to know him. But he was one of those kids that seemed just as at home with a book in his hand, or while fiddling with a Rubik's Cube. He was a nice kid who came from a rough household and who, thankfully, maintained his good spirits in spite of his environment and grew into a generally good guy. I'm not quite sure how we got onto the subject, but somehow one day we started talking about paranormal phenomena. It honestly seems like a part of growing up for everyone is hearing ghost stories and spooky urban legends from their friends. But usually, it's more of a, hey, did you hear about this old abandoned house? Or, have you seen this creepy video? For most people I know who came from outside of the mountains. Instead, we usually talked about stuff that happened directly to us or our families. I mentioned this in the previous video, but most mountain folks seem fine with speaking openly about their paranormal experiences, so long as they don't seem like what they've experienced is something that could get them in trouble at church, per se. Seeing an angel? Yeah, you're fine. Seeing auras? Now you've stumbled into a gray area. Of course, I'm not quite sure what it was that my friend was seeing, as he didn't have a name for them. Auras? Halos? Whatever it was, the way he described it, he could see these wavering rings around somebody's head. Not that they were rings, per se, but more like transparent somethings, much like the way steam rolls off the road on a summer's day. They could be bigger and thicker, or thinner and far closer to the body. Now, I could sort of understand what he was seeing. If you got stuck in the same classroom we were, which had bright lights on one side of the room and nothing on the other, then yeah, sometimes you could see an almost halo-like ring around people's heads when they were under those bright lights. It was like a bat's eyes going bonkers upon emerging from its cave. I really hadn't noticed it before, and honestly, didn't really notice it outside of that one classroom. Although, to be fair, the rest of our classrooms had decent lighting in them, and didn't have the blinds drawn most of the time. But this kid, this Ben, he could apparently see more than the rest of us, and not just at school either. Whatever it was, he could see the steam-like whatchamacallit rise out from pretty much any part of their body not enveloped by clothes. So head, neck, and bare arms pretty much had this same strange wavering halo effect around them. Of course, we never could see what all he was seeing, but that was okay. He never seemed to tell stories for attention's sake. He just threw out the facts and went on with his day. I did ask him a few more times about details, but he just said it was nice to talk about it because he couldn't really bring up that sort of thing around his mother. She apparently was incredibly strict, and I got the feeling she had some sort of religious zealot thing going on. And I could understand why, especially with what else he told me he was seeing. That's right, my boy Ben was seeing Shadow Man. You see, there's another one of those iffy areas of the paranormal back where I came from. Some people counted them as ghosts, or just curious spirits, but a lot of folks considered anything solid black like that to be a demonic entity. And unless you were, like, talking about something that happened to a distant cousin, or were trying to shoo something off the property, so to speak, people might actually be a little wary of what you were saying. At least, the really religious old codgers were. The rest of us either could care less, or were interested in figuring out what they were. But I digress. The way I remember the story is that Ben had gone over to one of his relatives' houses and was there with some cousins. This house had a shed up on a little hill not too far from it, and a barn somewhere else close by. Well, Ben was playing in the yard on one side of the house with one of his cousins, and they decided to go back inside to get some water or something. Ben stepped up onto the porch. He happened to glance up and saw something black dart around behind the shed. He thought it might be one of his little cousins sneaking off to go explore, and ran after them, his other cousin following shortly behind to bring back their wayward sibling. Ben got to the shed and darted around behind it, but saw nothing. When he walked around the other side, though, he saw, to his surprise, the same figure had already beaten him back to the house and was ducking behind it. Ignoring his cousin's shouts once again, Ben bolted after the figure, calling out the names of his other cousins that it might be. When he got to the house, he ran around it, barely catching sight as the figure escaped him yet again. After running around the house and back into the front yard, he finally recognized the urgency in his cousin's voice. Ben turned around and saw his cousin was incredibly pale, and almost plowed into him because he was running so hard to stop him. Once his cousin caught up to him, he said something that made Ben's blood run cold. "Whatever that is, it's not my brother or sister." Ben's cousin's eyes then focused on something behind him, and he grabbed Ben's wrist, backpedaling quickly in pure terror. Ben turned around to see one of the barn doors was ajar, with something peeking out from behind one. Whatever this thing was, it was shaped like an adult human shadow, but it wasn't human. It was just a solid black mass, with a toothless smile that opened not to a dark void of a mouth, but to the weathered wood of the other side of the barn door behind it. Ben stood, awestruck, as he watched the shadow with a Chelsea grin slip back into the barn and out of sight. Ben and his cousin took one look at one another before dashing into the house, far away from whatever that thing was. I found out much later that there was a lot of drama that had gone on in his family at the time, and, considering how much of it concerned the relatives he had been visiting, it's not wholly unlikely there was some negative energy there. But whether it had manifested into something wicked, or had drawn the attention of an unsavory spirit, I don't know. All I do know was that Ben never went into that barn alone after that, and he was certainly glad his cousin had stopped him before he, in his naivete, had. Well, my friends, did you enjoy this story? And what do you suppose were the strange things my friend saw? Do you feel like there was a logical explanation to them? Whatever your theories, please leave them in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe. Hit the notification bell too, so you can catch your latest spooky fix the moment it comes out. Also, please check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/phantasmalpoppy. I'll have a special video to post there once I have 10 patrons, so please join in. Good night, and see you all real soon.